Hey guys, I am the Comics Kid 2099, and today I wanted to talk about something that I have sort of danced around before in my massive review of all of the X-Men movies leading up to the Wolverine and including the Wolverine that I did, I guess, last year. I talked a little bit about future X-Men movies that I would like to see, and I mentioned I would love to see a Magneto Origins movie. I would love to see a movie that solely focuses on Mystique, maybe in and around the Cold War. I talked about how I thought it would be great if we could just get an entire movie featuring the Brotherhood doing something. I thought it would be cool if we could get a Gambit movie where he's kind of off on his own, maybe shortly after Wolverine Origins. I talked about a lot of stuff that I would like to see, but if I'm being honest, I don't think it's very likely that we would get any of those movies. Well, today I wanted to talk about 5 X-Men movies that I would like to see, and I feel like this video is going to be different than the segment in the previous video because I feel like all of these videos, there is some way that we could perhaps see them happen as of what we have seen so far in the movies that we have gotten and what we know so far about the movies that are coming up. And before I get to the top 5, I did have an honorary mention that I wanted to talk about really quickly. I think it would be really awesome if we could get an X-Factor spin-off movie. If they were going to do this, I would want them to tackle the X-Factor investigations angle. They could skip the whole X-Men working for the government thing. I don't have a problem with that premise, but I don't necessarily have to see that in a film. And if they did tackle that in a film, I think they could probably do the Freedom Force thing before they did the more good guys thing where they're working for the government. And also, I would just be much more interested in seeing the mutants who are detectives and are solving kind of low-key crimes. Now, naturally, for a movie, you would want them to solve kind of a bigger crime, and the thing that kind of jumped off the X-Factor series that everyone is most familiar with was House of M. House of M happens, and suddenly there are only 300 mutants in the world. And this particular faction of the X-Men, they did not happen to be present whenever everyone else found out what the cause of all of the mutants losing their powers was. So these guys are trying to investigate that, and then they find out what it was, and they find out that a lot of these other superheroes were already aware of it. And that kind of puts a little bit of a split between X-Factor and the rest of the X-Men. I don't necessarily want to see a House of M-esque story happening in the movies, but I would like to see something along those lines where X-Factor is trying to discover what it is. Maybe if you wanted to set it in the present day, you could have X-Factor trying to figure out where the cure is coming from. Maybe the government has stopped distributing the cure, but maybe it's still being produced by someone else, and maybe these guys are trying to figure that out and trying to stop it. That would be interesting. I think a lot of these movies, by the way, that I'm going to be talking about could work in either timeline. If you've been keeping up with the X-Men movies, you know that there is a past timeline and a present day timeline. I myself am much more interested in the past timeline because there's a lot of characters there who we haven't really gotten to explore. Meanwhile, we've had 4 movies set in the present day timeline, and that's 4 movies where these guys have had an opportunity to explore some of these characters, and they haven't really taken those opportunities like I kind of wish that they would. But this is something that, in theory, it could work in the past timeline or in the present day timeline. And personally, I would really like to see Jamie Madrox be at the head of an X-Factor movie. And you might be saying, they already used the Multiple Man in X-Men 3. Well, technically, yes, they did. But that guy was never named on screen, I don't think. Maybe they did name him whenever he was joining Magneto. But if they did, well, they had 2 Emma Frosts, and they've basically had 2 Sabretooths that acted entirely different. So I think it would be okay to have a good Jamie Madrox. I don't think it would be that much of a problem. And if they did name him in X-Men 3, then maybe this guy could be, I don't know, that guy's son or something. I think they could come up with a way to use Jamie Madrox because I was really interested in the way that Peter David made that character work for me in the X-Factor Investigations run of X-Factor. And now for the top 5 X-Men movies that I would like to see. These are not really in any particular order. Some of them that are lower on the list I would like to see more than some of them that are higher on the list. I just kind of listed these as they came to me. So the first one that I will be talking about, we already know that there is going to be a sequel to The Wolverine that came out last year. And the announcement that revealed this to everyone specifically used the word sequel. They did not say we are going to get another Wolverine movie. A lot of the speculation that we have had about X-Men Days of Future Past is that the time travel going on from the present day to the 1970s, something huge is going to happen, and it is basically going to create a splinter timeline where the filmmakers can then do whatever they want without worrying about contradicting the 4 movies that we have had in the present day. And then possibly we will still get movies in that prior timeline while also getting X-Men movies that are unencumbered by the continuity of all of the films set after X-Men First Class and Days of Future Past. That would not eliminate all of the continuity problems, but it would be a really good start in my opinion. So if they wanted to do this, where the X-Men Days of Future Past characters are in their own world doing their own thing, and then we still wanted to do movies set in the present day in the timeline of the original trilogy and the Wolverine, I think they could do a movie with Daken. We know that Wolverine has been around over 100 years, so he very easily could have had a kid sometime, and he wouldn't necessarily know about it. Maybe shortly before he met Kayla in Wolverine Origins he had a kid. Or maybe sometime before or after, I don't really know. There's a number of ways that he could have had a kid. Maybe he even remembers the woman that he impregnated and he just doesn't know that she's pregnant. That could have been a way that they did it. They don't have to stick exclusively to the way the comic books did it. And if they did this, I would personally like to see Daken be killed at the end of the movie. I really hate the character of Daken. I have never liked him, so if they are indeed going to pursue doing a sequel with Wolverine, I personally would like to see them deal with Wolverine's past in the form of Daken, who is representative of that past. And I would like to see Wolverine kill him because I hate that character, and anytime I see him get killed or get hurt badly, I kind of smile inside a little bit. Maybe that makes me a bad person, but whatever. Also, I would like to see an Old Man Logan movie. Now, this may be surprising to some of you because I actually do not really like the Old Man Logan comic book story. In general, I don't really like Mark Millar's style. I feel like he's just not really that good of a writer. He's good at coming up with ideas, but in terms of executing those ideas, he's really not very good at all. But we all know that Hugh Jackman is getting older. He has already had the part of Wolverine for, I think, 14 years now, and eventually he is going to give up playing Wolverine. It may not be anytime soon, since apparently he is up for playing Wolverine in a sequel to The Wolverine, but eventually he's going to be too old to play Wolverine. Personally, I would like to see Hugh Jackman's send-off be a version of the Old Man Logan story. I wouldn't want it to be exactly like the Old Man Logan story, and in fact, it wouldn't be able to be exactly like it since there's a lot of characters in that story who Fox does not have access to. For example, the Avengers and a lot of the villains that they used. They would not be able to use those characters because those characters are under Marvel Studios. And Marvel Studios and Fox, there's a few characters that they can both use, like Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch, but for the most part, the characters that Fox can use, the Marvel Studios people can't use, and vice versa. But I would really love to see a story set way far in the future where Hugh Jackman is kind of old and maybe he hasn't been a superhero in a long time, and then something happens that kind of gets him back into the game, and then at the end he's kind of getting revenge on whoever it is that killed his family. I would love to see something like that. I don't know how likely that is, but I feel like this is a story that, with a lot of changes, could make a really excellent film. If you basically played this as a futuristic superhero version of The Outlaw Josie Wales, starring Clint Eastwood, this would be a killer movie, maybe one of the best X-Men movies ever. And I am a huge fan of X-Men First Class, so that is pretty strong words, as I don't think we're going to get a movie as good as X-Men First Class for a long time to come. But if they did something like this, I think they would have a serious shot at doing that. Another movie that I think would work really well, this one I would actually prefer to see it in the 1970s timeline after they do X-Men Apocalypse, which we know is going to be the next movie after Days of Future Past. I would really like to see a loose adaptation of Uncanny X-Men issues 235 through 238, which was the first time that we ever got to see Genosha, or Genosha. I've always pronounced it Genosha. I think everyone else pronounces it with a soft G. But anyway, I think this would be a really amazing story for a movie. The best X-Men movies, in my humble opinion, are the ones that tackle social issues disguised as normal superhero stories. X-Men First Class and X2 were the two big movies that really did this in a good way, and I think the Genosha Saga would be a really excellent chance to do that again. This time you would get to see what institutionalized slavery across an entire nation would look like. What happens when humans win and the mutants don't even have names. They just have numbers. They don't really have personality and they are just used as slave labor. What happens then? This would also be a really good time to have the air quotes bad guys and good guys team up. I would really like to see Magneto approach the X-Men and say, look, I know you guys hate me, but there is something here that we all need to take a look at and we all need to go and shut this down. And then you've got members of the Brotherhood and members of the X-Men going to this secret island that people don't really know has all of this mutant labor, and then they're going to shut down the entire government. And as with the original Genosha storyline, they probably wouldn't entirely succeed. Maybe they would bring this whole thing up to light, but they definitely would not completely shut down the Genoshan government. The best victory they could probably hope for would be bringing it to the attention of the United Nations. I would really love to see Genosha in the 1970s timeline. For some reason, I just don't see it working as well in the modern timeline, the present day stuff. And if you did this, you could eventually have Magneto ruling Genosha. That's another aspect of the Genosha thing that I really love, when Magneto was in charge and he was kind of trying to create this mutant paradise, and we got to see that all these years where he's talking about, if I was in charge, I would do X, Y, and Z. Well, now we get to see that he's not just talking out of his butt. He's actually trying to do that. And I think this would be a really interesting thing to do, but you would have to introduce Genosha, and then 2 or 3 films later, you could have Magneto become the overlord of Genosha. But again, this is something that you would really have to do if you splinter off the 1970s timeline and have it be a separate timeline that is not leading into X-Men 1, 2, and 3 and the Wolverine. I really don't think you could have Magneto leading the entire country of Genosha if you are trying to lead into the X-Men movies that came out in the early 2000s. Another X-Men movie that I would love to see be done in the 1970s timeline, X-Men in Space. A really great way that you could have this happen, maybe all of the time travel that's happening in X-Men Days of Future Past kind of gets the attention of the Shi'ar Empire, and so then you've got agents of the Shi'ar Empire coming to Earth in the 1970s because of tampering with the time stream. We saw a little bit of this in the Age of Apocalypse story, where Legion went back in time, and because of that, we had Lilandra coming and saying, listen guys, whatever's going on 20, 30 years ago, that is really screwing with the entire universe. You could really play around with this in the 1970s by saying, listen, something has happened and things are never going to be the same. Maybe the X-Men and the Brotherhood could be kidnapped by the Shi'ar and they're taken to be put on trial, and then something else happens, like the X-Men find out that Lilandra is going to be assassinated so that her younger sister can ascend to the throne. Something like that would be really cool. I personally am a huge fan of the X-Men in Space. Anytime we have that happen, I am a sucker for it. Even if it's not always a story that really works entirely, I still love it when the X-Men go in outer space. If it was up to me, I would have multiple movies where the X-Men are in space. Maybe you could do something kind of like at the end of the Rise and Fall of the Shi'ar Empire story, where a few of the X-Men get left behind, and then maybe they could form a sort of second generation Starjammers team. That would be really cool, and then you could have a spin-off with these guys trying to get back home, and they're sort of outlaws in the Shi'ar Empire trying to fight really bad guys and trying to fight the Shi'ar policemen who are just doing their job. I would really love that kind of movie. But I don't think everyone else would love to see the X-Men in space across multiple films. I think with most audiences, they would want the X-Men to be back on Earth by the next film. I don't think there's anyone else other than me who would like to see, say, 2 or 3 X-Men movies where the X-Men are still in outer space. I think I'm probably one of the only people who would want to see something like that. And number 5, I would like to see the X-Men versus the Brood. This is one that would be kind of hard to handle because as of now, the X-Men movies have tried pretty hard to be fairly realistic. I mean, you've got superpowers going on, but other than that, this doesn't exactly look like a world where aliens exist, and that would also be a problem in an X-Men in space movie. But if the Marvel Studios people can do it, I think the X-Men movies can do it. What I mean by that is, if you go back and watch the Incredible Hulk movie or the first Iron Man movie, those movies feel pretty realistic. If you ignore the fact that there's a giant green rage monster or there's a dude in a flying metal suit, those movies are more or less set in the real world, just like basically every other superhero movie that came before those movies. But now, at this point, you've got magic cosmic cubes, you've got alien god things, you've got time travel, you've got all of this stuff going on in the Marvel Studios movies, and I think you could do the same thing in the Fox movies. Days of Future Past has time travel as a huge plot element, and if you had gone back and watched X-Men 1 and X-Men 2, nobody would have thought that time travel is something that exists in this world. So I think if you kind of expand from that, say, okay, time travel exists, now let's do some aliens, now let's do a different kind of alien. I think you could easily do something like that. You would kind of have to lead into it. I don't think you could just have aliens show up in Days of Future Past and it would really work, but if you kind of led into it over the course of a few movies, I think that would be the way to do it. And also, I think we really need a break from Magneto as a villain. If you've noticed, a lot of these story ideas that I've talked about getting their own movie, Magneto is not the bad guy in any of them. I like Magneto, he's my favorite X-Men villain, but we do not need him as the villain in every single X-Men story. There are a lot of other really great villains out there that you could use, and I think this would be a great way to do that. Use the Brood, use the Shi'ar Empire, use Genosha. These are some very viable concepts that are begging to be done well on screen, and I think they could be done well, and they could make people really fall in love with the X-Men movies, because if I'm being honest, a lot of people really don't like the X-Men movies, and I think these would be some good ways to kind of bring people back to the X-Men and make them fall in love with this franchise again. So, those are my top 5 and my 1 honorary mention. What do you guys think of this list? Do you agree? Do you disagree? What kind of X-Men movies would you like to see in the future? After X-Men Apocalypse, there are a number of different ways that I would love to see this franchise go. Let me know what you would like to see in the movies in the comments below. If you liked this video, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I will be back tomorrow with an entirely different kind of video. So, until then, I will see you guys then. Have a great day.